Hi, welcome to the March 4th Litchfield School Board meeting. Please rise for Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Any adjustments to the agenda?
I think we have made them all. I think it may be helpful to have the school year calendar and graduation date down before the curriculum report, so that way we'll have Principal Rothos here. All right.
Where's that? Right here? Okay.
Yeah.
How about the policy still here?
We moved the policy down to before the principal's reports.
Do you want to move those till after so they don't have to stick around for it?
Well,
Or did you want them here?
they're on salary and she's paid by the hour.
Oh. Perfect, okay.
Truth in advertising.
I tried, guys, sorry. Okay. Any presentations and recognitions?
Not this evening.
Okay. Summary of non-public actions from February 4th, 2015. Mr. Barker made a motion to approve the non-public minutes of February 4th as written. Mrs. Prindle seconded. Motion carried 4-0-1 with Mrs. Lepore abstaining. Mrs. Prindle made a motion to leave the 3 existing administrators' contract in place as is. Mr. Barker seconded. Motion carried 5-0-0. I don't believe we had any correspondence. Approval of draft minutes 2/18/15. Do you have a motion?
Motion to approve the minutes.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries 4-0-0. Community forum. No one? Superintendent's comments?
Glad
We
to be
are
back.
moving along.
My goodness, you're awesome, Derek.
School board comments.
I actually have a few.
Oh, you ruined
Since,
us.
I know, I ruined it. Sorry, I'll be quick. So I can't resist. So tonight's my last night. No tissues needed, as I said before. So first of all, thank you to the community and the board for the opportunity to come back. Hopefully I was helpful in the short time that I was here. So since I'm leaving, and I'm such a process operations person in my real life, I couldn't resist sort of just sharing a few things that I would say are observations and things for you guys to think about, or whoever the full board is next time, so they are quick there. So one is you just asked about email, so it seems like we could do a better job of getting coordinated around the emails that come into us, so maybe designate one person on the board and it could be rotated to just forward them along to Michelle or something who could then log them so we knew what they were and if we responded, because we've had a few that people have said we haven't responded to. It's not because people don't care, it's just because there's a lot going on and we all have real
That's a good
life,
point,
so.
because it's
We probably could be a
stabbed us
little
before.
more organized
Yeah.
around the email communication, and we do owe people responses, so that's one thing. The other is, I think we've gotten some feedback on, oh, you guys are supposed to do this, why isn't this done? Like, could we go through the policies and have a schedule? There's not that many things that we have deadlines that things that we are supposed to do, like the report, which I know you're working on now. Seems like we could just have a calendar for the year of the stuff that we're supposed to do, so we know it all, and then track it. Michelle will hold us to it, I'm sure. I think tracking, I'm on a tracking theme, tracking some of the requests that we make of both Dr. Cochran and our business administrator. I think sometimes we've asked for things and we don't get it, and then we come back, and it's just been a lot of back and forth, so I just think we could do a better job.
It's basically just someone writing down the action items and keeping following up on them.
I think we'll get to this with the strategic plan, but just being clear on what the priorities are and working on them. I know I was here during budget cycle, which takes up a lot of the time, but it seems like we're not really focused on a set of specific things. We're just listening, and I think we could do a better job there. The legislative updates, I know coincidentally we got some stuff from Frank this week, and then Dr. Cochran sent us something, but I recall when I was on the board last time, we had a much more proactive, we had a kind of regular legislative update. We were always talking about whatever was going on in the legislature that we should be aware of relative to education. And I have been thinking, gee, it feels like that's a big gap for us. And then oddly enough, we just got the message from Frank, so maybe there's a way to incorporate
He
that.
sends that to us every other week.
So, but we don't talk about
Oh, yeah, we don't talk about it.
Right.
They used to
We,
come from the NHSBA,
Ah.
but we're not a member this year.
Right. Yes,
Next
now that
year.
you say that, yes, I remember
Next
what
year,
they look
we'll
like.
get them again.
So just, I mean, I don't know if there's things there that we should be paying attention to that we're not, so that would be another observation.
Just a quick comment
Yeah,
before
go ahead.
before I forget that. We have asked Mr. Burke as board chair to sit in on the School Board Association two legislative sessions. So to
Yeah.
try and get the board chair directly in contact with those. The first one was canceled due to weather, and the second one is scheduled for March 30th, and he is planning on attending, but the point well taken.
So that's it, just, for whatever it's worth, you guys do with it what you want, but.
Those good ideas,
you know,
appreciate
just
that.
some things to think about.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you, Andy, for serving.
Yes, thank you.
You're very helpful.
If you have any particular suggestions that you think would be helpful to me, please
I'll be
just let me
sending
know.
you a long list.
Right. Feedback is always good, and
Feedback
you
is a
have
gift.
a
There's a
good and
lovely book
critical
about
eye.
that.
Thank you for that.
Excellent. Any more,
Very quick, Derek.
any more school board comments?
Sent out traded emails with Brian Bork and about a few other issues over the last few days or whatever, but he asked me to share this one, this exchange, because he's sort of in agreement with it, and it's probably something right along the lines of what Mary was talking about, but you know, the board doesn't seem to have any focus. You know, we need to set 3 to 5 goals. We have a new election. We need to get the new board in, the new board in by the end of March. And we need to set 3 to 5 goals for the board or for staff or whatever that we can track and monitor. It should happen every March, April timeframe. It should be something that we can measure as being completed by February, end of February, our last meeting in February, our first meeting in March, because that's when our board will now be turning over again. One of the biggest things I think is the next board needs to address is whether we're going to be a days versus hours district, and if, whichever way we decide on that, pros and cons on that, how to work that out. The start times for the schools, whatever occurs, we're going to be working on the busing and stuff like that. Again, that was a conversation we started back in November, and you know, 5 months later, we still are no further along in any information on that. I can't believe it should take that long, but we do know that there's a reduction in buses, and if we're going to be making changes to school start time and ending times inside of whatever agreements we have, then we need to begin looking at that and having discussions with the community if we need to. One of the things that are required is the 60 hours of additional time. There's an article, I'll forward that article to everybody, but it was in the Union Leader. I think Brian was sharing me a document. Maybe he can just share that document out to the board. But you know, again, the 7th and 8th graders don't have by state statute or by Department of Education rules, the appropriate amount of scheduled hours, which is 60 hours above the 990 or whatever hours. And so that's something that again needs to be addressed. I know we tried to work on that for this year, but whether it's something that's fixed in the next year or two, or it needs to be fixed when the next contract comes up. It is something that needs to be fixed so that all the schools are getting enough amount of hours, and we're can have a little bit better continuity in our schedule. I mean, as it stands now, we're really stuck to the 180 days of teaching. We have no opportunity to address going to an hour process, which would work well for 10 of our 12 grades. and in that reflection causes issues with scheduling of graduation and the end of the school year. So I would hope that the board would spend some time, and this is from Brian, that everybody spend some time between now and the next time we get together, think of what are some important goals that you as a board member would like to see occur, and maybe that's something that we can put together and have in place as some board goals and some directions, so we can see some results rather than coming in here twice a month for 3 hours.
It seems like, and that's part of what I was saying, I totally agree. The strategic plan that you sent us, which I thought was gonna be on the agenda, but I guess it's not, so.
It's been a busy last few board meetings, so.
So we need, I mean, you guys, I guess I won't be here, need to get back to it. I think this would give us a good foundation going forward if we spend some time on it.
The current strategic goals that were adopted by the board originally were for the school years 2012-13 to 14-15. So they run to the end of this June, which would mean it would be an appropriate time for us to be doing it, which is why I brought it up last year. It is something that I brought up last August or September, but clearly a few things have intervened since then. It's taken some time.
Any more school board member comments? No. Student representative comments? Do you have anything for us?
They came last time. So
Okay, so it's- Cool. Policy first reading, JKAA, use of child restraint and seclusion.
Kevin, can you pull the mic over? Thank you. And this is Erin.
Erin Feltus. I'm from Drummond Woodsum, and I'm here to really answer any questions that you have about the new restraint and seclusion law, as well as the proposed policy that I know you all have been looking at. So just to give you some background on this law, the restraint law was originally created in 2010, and it only covered restraint at that point. And quite honestly, was probably a little bit too loose of a law. A lot of conduct that people might have thought were restraints were actually not restraints under that law. So it did allow a lot of exceptions that were not restraints. And so then in this most recent legislative session, they sort of went back to the drawing board and they tightened up a lot of those exceptions. So there is now a lot more conduct that will fall into the concept of what is a restraint. In addition, they added seclusion to the law for the first time, and they also added a concept called intentional physical contact for the first time, which is not quite a restraint, but something that parents still need to be notified about as well. So important thing to remember is that this law does apply to all students. Sometimes we get sort of thinking that this is a special education type of law, and certainly I think special education students may be restrained, but it can apply to any student. So that's important to keep in mind as well. Also, it does apply to any employee of the school district and really anyone under the control of the school district. So that would include your volunteers, your part-time or per diem coaches. All of those folks would have to comply with this law. It also applies to anybody that's implementing a portion of a student's IEP. So for example, if you have any students in out-of-district placements, those out-of-district placements must also follow this law. And so that's one, I bring that up to really highlight that I think it's important to sort of stick to what the law says in drafting a policy and making sure that it mirrors the law, because you are going to have people, substitutes coming in from, other districts or, coaches that maybe work in a different district and are coming here to, coach in the evening, or students in out-of-district placements. So making sure that we stick, I think, as close to the law as possible in this policy, just to make sure that there's no confusion for somebody coming in that maybe, there's different requirements in this district as opposed to the law. So I'm happy to go through the policy if that would be helpful. for folks, or I can just answer any questions or explain the law.
Want to explain it first, just to kind of,
So our policy was approved in 2005. Is that the one is that,
I think there's a new proposed one, is that right? A new proposed one.
so which one are we, so that's the old one, or is it?
The old one is JGG, the new one is JKAA.
But that said it was approved in 2005.
JKAA, did I switch it?
That's what it says.
Can you click on it?
JKA, the bottom
So I
says,
think we had a lot of
oh,
questions.
original
No,
policy,
the original
JGG.
was approved in 2005.
Oh,
It says
okay,
it.
So this is all
This
new.
is the new policy.
This is the new.
This is the new one.
And does this mirror the law, basically, or?
It does, it mirrors law,
Okay.
it really, I think, as close as we could get it to.
Okay.
It starts really, the policy starts with just a general description of what is a restraint. And that includes a bodily, physical restriction, mechanical devices, any device that restricts the freedom of movement. It also includes mechanical restraints, physical restraints, and medication restraints. Now, this is the general definition of restraint within the statute, and this is the definition that applies for any sort of facility such as hospitals, foster homes, group care homes, shelter homes. They are all subject to this law as well, so that definition is very broad. When we look at schools in particular, the legislature has said that we're going to scale back on that a little bit, and so schools are not allowed to use all of the possible forms of restraint. So schools can only use physical restraint, and they can only use mechanical restraint in the course of transportation. So schools can never use medication restraint. And so we highlight that on the second page of the proposed policy, is that medication restraint would be prohibited. The definition that's set out there is just the general definition that the legislature has set out for the definition of a restraint. The legislature then goes on to allow for 5 exceptions to a restraint, and I think these are very important because when you think about what is a physical restraint, it's really any restriction of bodily movement. So it's anytime there's a restriction of the child's freedom of movement or normal access to his or her body, that would be considered a restraint. And you can think of, there's many, many instances of typical staff-student conduct where, or interactions where that definition would fit. You know, you can think of some, you know, if you have a student that's constantly hitting their neighbor, and you want to go and take that student's hand and move it over, technically that would be a restraint, because you are restricting what they want to be doing with their body. But if you look at these 5 exceptions, these 5 exceptions would then cover your ability to sort of intervene in that situation. So that's why I think these restrictions are, or these exceptions are really, really important. Making sure that teachers and staff members can do and have the physical interactions with students that they need to in order to do their job, in order to intervene in the least restrictive manner, and really de-escalate situations before they reach the level of restraint. So those are the 5 exceptions that I think are very important, and really that I think all of our staff members should know, so that they can feel comfortable in knowing what they are and are not able to do with students. We've gotten some feedback from teachers that as a result of this law, they are sort of scared, and they are not quite sure what they can and cannot do. So I would want to make sure that these exceptions are very clear to them. So, any questions so far?
I just think as we're moving forward, it might be nice to, because I think some of the questions are these things happening in the Litchfield School District? You know, questions about seclusion. Do we actually have seclusion? Do we have, is it, you know, one of our interventions and so on? So at any time, Devin, if you want to talk about, or if board members have questions about, you know, where and when does this apply or not? Because in some cases, for example, the mechanical restraints in school, it's in our policy that we don't do it, right? So the question becomes, well, why is it there? It's there because if somebody actually does that, they're in violation of the policy. And so it's both legal protection and guidance for staff. So you do have that piece in some cases.
And I will clarify with mechanical restraints, you can still use a mechanical restraint in transportation, and that's included in the procedures as well, if a student needs a specific type of harness to really be transported safely. So there are some of those exceptions that still exist. But yes, please, if you have any questions about the policy or the law as I'm going through it, please just jump up. So if we move on to the second page that talks about seclusion, and like I said, this seclusion is brand new to this law, so we are all sort of figuring it out and figuring out what it means. And I think one of the difficulties with that is, and the law sort of sets it up, is that we tend to look at seclusion as in we have a specific seclusion site set up in our schools that we use. And that's not necessarily the case, because seclusion could occur outside of a specific room. So the definition of it is the involuntary placement of a child alone in a place where no other person is present and from which the child is unable to exit. And so you can imagine if you have, if we had a child in this room, for example, that was, this room is probably not a good example because the windows aren't very good, but you can imagine how if you have a student in a classroom who maybe has a meltdown, and it's unsafe for other students to be there, it's unsafe for staff members to be there, that they may evacuate the room and the child may be in that room alone. That room could then turn into a seclusion if they are in there involuntarily and alone. And they're unable to exit. So keep that in mind, as I think sometimes we think of seclusion as a specific space designated in our school for seclusion, and really it can morph into greater situations than that. So keeping that in mind, that it's really a function of the context and what's happening with that child as opposed to what specific room is it happening in.
So if you had a student in this room and you're an administrator and you said to that student, don't leave this room until you're told to, and the administrator leaves and the student is sitting in whatever chair, but if the student elected to ignore that instruction and walk out the door, the student is not secluded because they could still ignore the directive they were giving and walk out the door.
I interpret the statute that way, yes, because it does say they're unable to exit either due to physical manipulation by a person, lock, or other mechanical device or barrier.
Right.
So I interpret it that way. There is some, and not under this statute because we haven't had any case law under the statute, but there is some case law nationally that really says if the student believes that they're not free to leave, then they're not free to leave. That's not how the statute's written, and that's not how we're interpreting it, but there is that school of thought nationally. But I would look at it more, is there something physically forcing that child to stay in the room, such as a lock or somebody pushing on the door, that sort of thing. So that's how I view seclusion, but just keeping in mind that it could exist outside of the, sort of the timeout room that we typically refer to as a seclusion
Sure.
space.
So the reason we got onto that conversation about, it's a specific place and where is that in any of our schools, is because of the comment about unreasonable observation of, right, what school has that?
Right. And I
That's
do
why we
think,
thought that.
I do think the law leads you to believe that because they do have the specific requirements for a seclusion room. And that's why I point this out, is that it's really the circumstances that give rise to the seclusion as to the particular space. And you're right that there are a number of requirements with respect to if the student's going to be secluded, what should that room look like? And a lot of that is built around that, really shouldn't be sort of a janitor's closet type of thing. And the unbreakable glass is I'm not sure that any rooms really have that. And so what you're really looking at is if you do seclude a student and maybe you don't meet that piece of it, it's probably a technical violation of the law. But obviously, if all the other circumstances exist, it should be reported. And maybe that piece is a technical violation, but, yeah.
I was going to say, I'm going to editorialize a little bit. My understanding is that this legislation is in many ways associated with an advocacy group whose choice of language in describing what happens in schools and other institutions is, I wouldn't say incendiary, but their choice of language is meant to put the institution in the worst possible light. And some of that language, and feel free to disagree, but I think some of that language was originally put in there, and some has been over time taken out through the legislative process, but there still is a negative and almost anti-institutional bent in some of this by virtue of the language choices that were originally put in. And so if it seems to come across a little, just, not disturbing, but making you uncomfortable, I think that was the intent of the people who originally proposed the legislation. Aaron, is that?
No, I think that's accurate, and I also think that, and Devin and I were at a training earlier this week on this, and so she may be able to chime in a little bit more here too, but I think there is a tendency to believe that restraint is always a bad thing or a negative thing, and for some students, it can actually be a positive thing, in that they sometimes need security or control, and sort of a seclusion or a restraint may give them that opportunity. So each child is different, and needs to be responded to different, and it's, that's why we like to have our educators know what works for students and what doesn't. But I think if we approach this as a restraint is always a negative thing, that may not necessarily be the best approach. Really thinking about what works for each student. And for some students, having a little bit more of that contact can actually be a very good thing.
Going back to your first example, where say there was a student in here, there was a class going on, and the student had a meltdown and started throwing chairs and stuff like that, and they moved the students out. Can you seclude the student in here for the safety of the student themselves and the other students?
I think you could. I mean, in order to have a seclusion, there has to be a risk of physical harm, and that is a different standard than restraint, and I'll talk about that in a second, but
Okay.
there has to be a risk of physical harm. And so if the child is actually throwing things at other students, certainly get all the other students out. If they're throwing things at the staff member that's supposed to be in there with the student, certainly that staff member could step out. What is required is that the student always be auditorily and visually monitored. And so that's why I said with this room, that would be a little difficult because we have the paper over that door. They may be able to do it a little bit over here, but that's the tricky part. And so sometimes, you may have to keep the door open, just to see how much you can hear or see, so that, there is no, even if it's not open the whole time, so that there can be some of that auditory and visual observations. But of course, sometimes, particularly if we're thinking about, let's say we had a 200-pound student and maybe an 80-pound paraprofessional, the safest thing for that paraprofessional in that situation is not necessarily going to be staying in the room just because they don't want to have a seclusion. The safest thing is for that paraprofessional to probably step out of the room, get help, and so somebody can come in and either do a restraint or something like that that might be more effective. So it's really going to be on a case-by-case basis, but yes, I think you could use a seclusion in that space. And like I said, there may be a technical violation if that's not, unbreakable glass. But I'd be much more willing to have you accept a sort of a technical violation than to have, major safety issues.
I'm just thinking of the other students as well. Obviously, that student has rights, but the other students have rights as well, and you can't just,
Right.
I mean, if you don't seclude them, then everyone else is at risk as well.
And the standard for a restraint didn't actually change, but I'll just go over that with you. And in order to use a restraint, you have to have a substantial and imminent risk of serious bodily injury, and there has to be a threat of physical harm. And so that is a very, very high standard to meet, because substantial and imminent risk of bodily injury really means there has to be a risk that there's going to be a need for medical attention. And so sometimes if a student is just being disruptive and throwing a temper tantrum, that's not going to be a situation where you can even use a restraint. And so that's why sometimes we will say, okay, all the other students exit, because we're not able to use a restraint to get that disruptive student out of the classroom. There are some exceptions that allow you to do sort of an escort in that situation, but it's sort of understanding how all of these concepts work together and figuring out how do we keep our students safe and still make sure that they're able to learn in their environment. So
I think Mr. Barker's point is an interesting and important one, because it speaks to, that intersection between a student's right to an adequate education, and especially in the case of an identified student for FAPE, free and appropriate public education, how that intersects with the other students' abilities to have access to that same education, and how that plays out in the lives of teachers teachers and other staff on a daily basis. Because, depending on where you're teaching and whether you're working in an EH program or a room that specializes in some other disabilities, autism spectrum, for example, this can be a daily part of managing these sorts of situations can be a daily and quite exhausting and very challenging part of what you do. And you know, in some cases, you get more of that interaction than others. And I'm sure that in situations where students will go home and report that, well, the rest of us had to leave the classroom today because of X, then, you know, then you get parental questions about that. So,
So, I noticed on page 7, there's the records of intentional physical contact.
Yep.
And there's a whole process of going through. So, I imagine this is probably something that occurs at the administrative level in the schools.
So intentional.
By a principal or assistant principal that is going to handle this process.
Yes, and so intentional physical contact is a completely separate animal, separate from restraint. And so when you think of restraint, that's you know, meeting that criteria, you're having that bodily restriction, physical restriction. And then, but there's also those 5 exceptions. And so if you use one of the 5 exceptions, it's not a restraint. However, if you use one of the 5 exceptions as a result of the student being combative or disorderly, assaultive, something like that, that's called intentional physical contact. So if you have to intentionally engage in contact with a student as a result of their negative behavior, being assaultive, combative, if they're in a fight, something like that, that's when this intentional physical contact piece of the law sort of crops up. And what that requires is that the parent be notified by the time that the child really return home. That says, you know, your child got in a fight today, we had to have the principal break it up. And so the principal, you know, separated the 2 kids, but they did put hands on in separating them. So you notify the parent by the time the child gets home, this is the physical contact that we had. And then within 5 days, there's a report that needs to be done. The law does not require that report go home. It just requires that the report be done and then maintained by the school district.
So as you read through that process on that, the next paragraph 11 or 12 says Department of Education review. If there was an incident that occurred in a school, I don't see where it's referencing following the school procedures for the resolution of an issue. I mean, our process now, if there's something occurs in the school, it goes to, you know, the teacher, but in this case, it would probably go to the principal. If the parent wasn't happy, they would go to the superintendent. If they weren't happy, then they would come to the school board, and then if they weren't happy, then they'd go to the Department of Education. But it seems that they can just skip all that and go directly to the Department of Education. Is that?
That's my understanding of the statute. The Department of Education is currently in the process of writing the rules around this complaint procedure. So hopefully that will give us some more guidance as to whether or not they want, the schools to develop something more locally that happens first before they come to the Department of Ed.
Okay, so
But
this is, that right now, that process is sort of like being skipped.
Yes, yes. So I'll just touch on a few other pieces that I think typically tend to come up as questions. The first one is this concept of trained personnel. So restraints and seclusion can only be performed by trained personnel. The statute does not define what a trained personnel is. And so what schools have typically been doing is using sort of like a CPI type training, some sort of program that's already designed to do de-escalation training and to do training around what are safe techniques in restraint. And the DOE seems to find that those are satisfactory. Other than that, we really have no guidance as to what is appropriate for training. So I would, stick with some sort of type of model like that. We are seeing that because the amount of exceptions have decreased and a lot more physical contact, I think, is going to be considered a restraint than it was under the previous law. We're seeing a need to have more folks in more buildings be trained on restraint and seclusion, just to make sure that if they, for example, run across a fight in a hallway, that there are some limited interventions they can do, but beyond that, that would be considered a restraint that could only be done by trained personnel. And of course, the last thing we want is a bunch of staff members standing around saying, I'm not trained, so I'm not going to intervene in a dangerous situation. So that's why we're encouraging that more folks do get trained.
Devin, is the CPI that you're a trainer for?
I'm a certified trainer, right, so I've been trained staff.
We paid that because knowing the turnover that you have in paras and other staff, to have the resource in district, we thought it was a good move. A couple of years ago, we invested in having Devin get her certification.
Should every staff member be trained? So that any staff
Well,
member can...
CPI is more than restraint. CPI is a system of de-escalation that starts, and, you know, something more in the restraint and is at the end of that process. So CPI is
Right, it's the last step, it's about
So-
intervening early, de-escalation.
So it's not a quick training? It sounds like a...
No, it's,
Okay.
it's, with, yeah,
Yeah.
without the, well, it's about 6 to 8 hours without covering the restraint positions.
Hour.
And about 8 to 10 if you cover them, so it takes some time, there's
Yeah.
notes and tests and, so we've gone through, we have special educators that are trained, there's some administrators that are trained, so we're working through and trying to get more.
And we're fortunate that Director Dan Vandersky brings a very broad and deep experience in a range of environments to go with the certification. So.
I'll touch a little bit on notification requirements, and this is on number 8 of the procedures. Page 5 on the draft that you have. Notification requirements, anytime a restraint is used, the parents need to be notified by the time that the child goes home, or by the time the child is returned to the parent. And that's, I'm sorry, for a restraint and a seclusion. So you make that contact, you know, almost immediately, verbally, if you can, and if you can't, then document the efforts that you made to do that. And then there are 5 business days, or what the amount of time that a person has in order, the employee who did the restraint or the seclusion, they have 5 days to get a report done. And that report is pretty extensive in the number of criteria that they need to provide. And so when I think about a Department of Ed investigation about a restraint or seclusion, I think one of the things they're really going to be looking at is, did we follow this notice and reporting requirement? So that's why I would want to make sure that, you know, that staff members feel like they have the time to be able to fully answer all of these questions, get assistance from the principal or the special ed director or whoever they need to be able to fill out that form and meet all of those requirements. And then within 2 days of that, there are additional requirements for the principal to notify the parent about that as well. Those are the main pieces of the law. Are there any specific questions about the policy or about the law?
So it looks like you've reviewed our policy, and
Yep.
do you think it's well
Yeah,
within the law?
I think our firm drafted it.
Yeah, okay, perfect.
So I'm good with it.
Makes it easy.
Well, one thing that I had a question about was, I know that the procedures go into the statutory definitions, but since this is the Litchfield School District policy, do we need to include medication restraint, involuntary medication? Do we need to even have that in our policy? Just because if we're not going to do that ever, but yet we have it in our definitions of restraint. If I were someone reading this, I would think this is something that goes on here because we include it in our procedures. So can that be removed, or?
It could be removed. My hesitation in removing it is that it does clearly outline what is a medication restraint, and then later on it says, you can't do this. And so when I think about maybe for our nurses who are like, well, you know, I know I can't do a medication restraint, but what does that mean? You're providing the definition in there so that they know what a medication restraint is. And it's important because it's essentially forcing a child to take medication as a result of, or to control their behavior. But we do have students who have certain medications that they take on an as-needed basis for their behavior. So maybe they're feeling like, my anxiety's getting up, I'm getting a little out of control. They can go to the nurse and say, I need this, you know, I want this medication for my behavior. So this, I think, helps clarify it for those professionals to say, okay, I know what a medication restraint is, and I know that what I'm doing right now it doesn't meet that definition of a medication restraint. So I think certainly you could take it out if that makes it clearer for you, but I think leaving it in helps our staff members to understand what is and is not, you know, a medication restraint, or what is or is not a mechanical restraint. Any other questions about the policy? Or about the law in general?
I think it was really helpful.
Yeah, thank you.
It was our discussion we had last time.
We were pretty confused
With all
last
the
time.
things,
And having been, I know Mr. Thompson and I, just before the break week, had occasion to recall to a class when I was down there and spend some time with a young student who was in the midst of a little bit of a mess in a classroom. And I think there were other students in the room who were taken next door to work on some things. And so this is not an unusual situation, but it is a situation that over time, we need to work with students who we think we can educate well in their local school, to have them come to manage their behavior over time. And sometimes it's a long process, and you know, having one daughter who's an EH specialist and who's worked in 2 different states in different programs, I know at times the issues that can come with this and the challenges that come with it. But the goal really is that over time, the student becomes more and more responsible for their own behavior. And that is the ultimate goal. And the question becomes, how do you do that safely over time as that child matures, knowing at different points in their developmental cycle, different challenges are going to arise. In some cases, it's purely child safety. You have students who are, quote, runners, and that is when they get upset, they will just bolt. And, you know, in schools in the past, they said, well, we'll just lock all the doors. We'll put chains on this so the kid can't make it to the river and drown themselves. No, all right? We can't lock the doors to the building in case we have a fire. So some of it is very much to protect the child from where they are developmentally at that point in time. And in some cases, it's to protect staff and other students, and still maintain an environment that's conducive to learning.
I actually have one more quick question. I guess, given all this, if there are students who repeatedly fall into this, where we have to restrain them and stuff like that, is there a point that the district comes to where they're better off putting that student in a situation that's better for them to reduce liability on our part?
One of the pieces in the statute or in our policy is that the first time that occurs is going to trigger an IEP meeting.
Okay.
And so that's when the IEP team is going to review all of that information and make informed decisions.
And in addition to that, if it's happening multiple times and the parents say, I'm concerned about this, and they can ask for another IEP team meeting as well.
Okay.
So the statute does allow modifications to the program if they are seeing this as a concern. And
What
that's-
about not necessarily the students' parents that's causing the problem, but other parents? I guess what would their recourse be?
So if other parents are complaining about what's
Yeah, so we
happening-
just talked about a situation where a student has a meltdown and the other students have to leave. Say that happens on a frequent enough basis where the other parents become concerned. I mean, what's the avenue
I
there?
think that's still handled through the team process.
Okay.
And that would be, you know, convening a team meeting and having a discussion, say, this, you know, is really disruptive to the regular education class. Maybe we need to look at modifying the program or coming up with a more restrictive program, something like that. But it would still be done through the IEP team process.
And then if there's disagreement between the parents' perceptions of what's best for the child and the district's, then you have a well-defined process for that called literally due process in terms of the placement.
Any more questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Moving forward.
They have a first reading, they're gonna come back for a second reading.
It has to, if you approve it.
I'll make a motion to approve JKAA.
Second.
Any more discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Yeah. Abstain? Oh, okay. Motion carries 4-0-0. Student, is it student council or student reps?
We also need to move JKAA-R to first reading.
Well, if it's a procedure, it doesn't need to be approved by the board.
Oh, okay.
You can just do a
Attachment.
final approval
Just to.
at the second.
Did you say student reps are here now, or
They
student
are
council?
here. Yes,
Okay.
they are Jack and Ty and Shelby and Mr. McDonough, do you guys want to say anything for student reps today?
It's something, but we are kind of like going forward discussion for probably the next meeting. Most of our stuff we talked about last time.
Okay, so you're just here to
Yep.
visit?
Yep.
It's rare.
We just came back from the conference, so we thought we'd stop by and say hi.
We appreciate it. All right, principal's report. Start off with GMS.
Oh.
So, gotcha. We can start with CHS if you want.
But you caught him off guard because CHS is actually
Oh.
listed first in the agenda.
Mine's listed.
No, mine is
It's
alphabetical.
alphabetical.
Making sure you're still awake.
Just to clarify, it says Q&A only.
Oh, does it?
On
Okay.
the agenda, so I didn't know, I can highlight a few things in the report if you'd like me to do that.
No, I guess. Anyone have any questions? I have no problem going fast.
I'll go fast. Okay.
Highlights probably good.
So, some of the things were
30 seconds.
highlighted in the February report as upcoming events. I'm not gonna go back to those, they happen, so we
Yep.
don't have to talk about it again. I will just mention, because it's next week, that March 12th is our third annual math and reading night at GMS. And we will have shuttle buses again from 5:45 at the middle school because of parking concerns. And that will run until 7:15. I mean, people are going constantly because from 6 to 7 is the event. But that will be next week on Thursday night at the school. The curriculum things, I'm sure that Julie will be talking about those, so I will skip those. This is Read Across America Week. We have events every day, beginning with Crazy Hair Day on Monday. No, that was today. It was Crazy Hat Day on Monday. So we had an assembly that afternoon, and students are really getting into it. But we will have special events to celebrate reading through the vehicle of Dr. Seuss's birthday all week. I did want to acknowledge the really fabulous support that the community has brought for the family whose home burned last. That was quite public in the paper. And in particular, Susan Haley from our PTO really headed that up. So I'd like to thank her. I know the other school involved was also involved and other community agencies, but it was quite heartwarming to see all that happened to help the Casperzaks. We have redone our testing schedule since last I brought it. I think that was January. But we are going to be testing only in the morning for two reasons. One is, it hadn't occurred to us that the laptops would not have time to recharge if we did both. And also the students are brighter in the morning. That's a general observation. So we're going to be testing only in mornings and using the full 5 weeks. On the in-service day, I'll have a specific time schedule, but in general, we're going to be working on instructional unit design. That's been a year-long project. We're going to have smarter balanced new information for 3rd and 4th grade test administrators, and then also a session of Carol Kuznitsky, consultation for special ed. And that is also related to unit design, but meaning particularly the needs of identified students within that process, I believe. The Arts Festival for the district is coming up on March 17th and 19th. So even though that's our first week of testing, we have worked with music teachers district-wide to allow our students to go to the rehearsals in the afternoon, and then the concerts of that night at 6:30, those 2 nights. This is a permission item. If you would, our 3rd grade is going to the Museum of Science, and Mrs. Sabona talked to me. They would like to do a penny drive for the students, and the purpose of the penny drive is to support the museum's campaign to keep the Triceratops skeleton at the museum. Apparently, it was purchased for $850,000 by a Boston resident at an auction. I read the story, and has let it be shown there Its value is many times that, but he's willing to let the museum keep it for $850,000. So they'd just like to get the students involved while receiving it and just do anything. So I'm mindful of money, collections being needing more approval. So I said I would see if that would be okay if we did that. So I'd be requesting, I don't.
Do we need a motion for that?
It's a fundraiser?
Yeah, so I'll make a motion to approve the GMS Penny Drive for the Triceratops exhibit for Cliff.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
All good. Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstained? Cool.
Thank you very much.
No problem.
The chorus sang the national anthem at the Monarchs game on Friday, the 20th, the day before vacation. And they combined it with, last year the PTO had done only a family night, but chorus wasn't there. And this year they sold over 400 tickets of people who went to that game. I do confess, I left before the end. I left after the second period because my wife was also present and she had a day-long event at her job the next morning. So we left and it was tied 2-2, and they lost in overtime. But the important thing is the chorus was fabulous, and they were frequently on the TV with the scoreboard because of their enthusiasm in the audience, and they're all wearing bright orange T-shirts. So it was really an exciting event, but it was really fun. And the big news this week is that DI has their regional tournament this Saturday. It's at Nashua High School North, beginning at 8 o'clock with a parade of banners. And then there are 7 teams, and they'll be competing throughout the day, finishing, I think the last one is at 3:15. But that's coming up this week, and it's really exciting to see so many students engaged with that. I thank Marissa Fluid, who's the organizer. She was also a coach last year, but there's a whole list of coaches. It's all parent volunteers and many, many students, so it's really exciting. Lego Club is also up and running. Again, there's many volunteers running that. And then the last thing is that the PTO Mother-Son Movie Night has been moved to March 27th, because I think the week before is when the DI teams are doing an ice cream event, so they moved the Mother-Son event.
What's the Math Dash Club? I don't think I've ever heard of that.
Yeah, I had mentioned that last meeting, I think. But Miss Farrow had the idea, actually last year, we do a spelling bee at the end of each year. She wanted to do something to get students involved in voluntarily pushing themselves with math knowledge and ability to apply. So she and Mrs. Parent and Mrs. Maloro, the Title I math tutors, they put together a series of challenges, and this was for 3rd grade, because we have tournament of leaders for 4th grade.
Yeah.
So the math groups, they form teams, and they have great names. And there were, I believe, 7 teams altogether in that event. And they give up recess 1 day a week voluntarily, and they do math. It's really interesting. So they get scored on the results. The top 4 teams will do quarterfinals this week, and then the top 2 teams next week will compete for bragging rights. And I think there's maybe something for that as well. So it's really been motivating to the students. So.
Excellent, thank you. Any questions for Mr. Thompson?
Sounds good.
Mr. Lepladder?
Thank you. I'll start with just a few things that didn't make the report, have come up recently. First, very exciting news. Yesterday we found out that Javier Martinez, one of our 7th graders, he won our school geography bee. He advanced to the written test that you take as a result of winning your school bee. He has moved on now from that to qualify for the state championship. So that's in State College coming up in 2 weeks. I believe he'll be part of that. So very exciting. I can't remember a student making it that far. I've had students do real well on the written test, but not qualify. So good luck to Javier, and he did a great job on that. Our music program is very busy right now, kind of in the festival season, and we have our arts festival coming up internally in the district in a couple of weeks. But they'll also be attending the South Central Music Festival, and we have 4 students, Rachel Goldstein, Sophia Shabu, Josh Hoffman, and Brett McInerney, who have qualified and will be going to that. They attended the Solo and Ensemble Festival a couple of weeks ago. We had 30 students go to that, and large group is coming up. We have a lot of students involved in all of those programs. So, very busy season for music, and as you all know, the district festival is fantastic. Looking forward to that and the art presentations. A couple of quick things on Smarter Balance. Today we tested 5 of our labs simultaneously with the browser, which is the browser students actually will use when they test. It draws a lot of bandwidth, and it went very well. We were very pleased. Students did a great job. The computers did a great job. They held up. No power outages and no others as a result. So we will be able to go forward with our schedule as written, which starts in April, and we will be testing really, it ends up being about 8 weeks total, but that was really good news. I'm going to be, with the PTO, we're working together to sponsor a Smarter Balance Parent Information Night. That's going to be on March 16th in the cafeteria, and that'll be really highlighting what is Smarter Balance, what is the whole testing process and how that works. I know there's a lot of questions, I think, from parents out there, not only, what exactly does the test look like, but how is it going to impact scheduling and all of those things in the school for those couple of months. So again, that's March 16th. A couple of things on curriculum. Let's see. We've been conducting, still on Smarter Balance, we've been conducting the practice and training tests over the past few weeks. That's gone really well. Just want to commend the students on doing a great job with that, and our staff has been doing a lot of work just to stay up on everything with Smarter Balance. It really is a daily thing. We're getting more information daily through Dr. Heon or the state directly. And we're feeling like, we're continuing staying ahead of the curve on all the information and doing a good job with that. Mr. Thompson mentioned March 10th next week. We have very similar schedules, professional development presentation in the morning related to the unit design, and then some Smarter Balance training for about an hour, and then the unit design work will continue in the late morning and afternoon. We've been doing a book study on at our staff meetings this year, and ironically today's at our meeting, our book study was on unit design. So it's very relevant to what we've been talking about all year. A couple other acknowledgements, and I know you've seen this, but it's become now sort of an annual tradition. We have a dodgeball tournament in our school, and students get very excited, very involved. There's a lot of students involved. I'm not sure how many total, but our Unified Arts team puts it on, and there's a ton of spirit. This happened right before break. But the money goes toward Project Safeguard, which is an important program we do with our 7th graders, which is coming up in May. But I just wanted to recognize the Unified Arts team, and the students as a whole raised over $700 this year. May not sound like a ton of money, but the way this comes in really is change every day at lunches, and they've been doing this now, like I said, for a few years. But this year there was just a real lot of spirit, and the matches were very competitive. Safe, soft, very soft balls.
I was just going to ask, I didn't know kids were allowed to play dodgeball still. Like throwing balls at each other was like against the rules.
Very, very soft and safe. But a lot of fun and a lot of spirit there.
I haven't had a single accident report yet.
No, there were none. There were none. Actually, the most competitive match was the staff versus staff game.
Of course.
Yes.
And everybody was decked out in weird outfits
Surprise.
and everything, so it was a lot of fun. Just a few upcoming dates. The this is also kind of a light one, but this Friday is our Krispy Kreme donut pickup. We have 1,500 dozen donuts coming, and Mr. Cloutier doesn't have a student in our school, but he's offered to go down to Mohegan Sun, God bless him, and pick up the donuts and bring them back for 6 a.m. So
He's been soliciting help on Facebook for the last couple of days.
yeah,
Not many
he's-
takers.
He's big help there. Our 5th grade has their Minute to Win It night this week, Friday night, and our PTO is doing a Natticook night. Natticook is a restaurant in town. Proceeds 10%, I think it is, of all the bills that night go towards the PTO. And our next school dance is next Friday. Also Project Safe fundraiser.
Excellent. Any questions for Mr. Leflatter?
If I can interject a comment. The change to Smarter Balance and online testing, even though we've done online testing with NWA before, the amount of administration and prep work for Smarter Balance has been significant. And the information came, we're very fortunate because Dr. Heon tripped out to California, and the time that she spent out there was great for EPD, but it also meant that she was, you know, one of the people most in the know in the state in terms of where to find information. And the Department of Education in New Hampshire is relatively underfunded, so we usually end up stealing from other states who are better funded. And she's done a great job of finding stuff and feeding it forward. Then the schools have had to look at their schedules and redo the schedules, knowing that we still had to do the systems check. We did start today a larger audit of the technology, our technology infrastructure and wireless systems, which began today. And your check today was not a part of it, but I know that Mr. Dewar had already gone through the building, checked the wireless spots, identified the best place for the testing and that sort of thing. The amount of work around the first rollout of Smarter Balance has been significant. And it's been compressed into a short period of time in a busy time of the year. SAU office, Dr. Heon in particular, administrative teams, teachers, paras, special education teachers have really put in a ton of time. It's been difficult work. We're this first time through especially, we went through and did all of the testing at the schools and said, yes, our bandwidth is fine. And then we're given notification that you need to use these special browsers that had to be then installed in every computer that's going to be used in testing, only to turn out that it pulls more bandwidth than a normal browser. And so we had to redo that process. And I know talking to the middle school administration today, I was very relieved that they'll be able to go with their original testing schedule based on the result. It has cut across the amount of time that administration and SAU and teachers have had to spend on other things. And I just want to let folks know how much I appreciate the flexibility and the time to try and ensure that we'll get, results, hopefully that will reflect where our students are and allow us to learn and benefit from that. But please recognize that I think all the administrators in the district know, as well as I do, the amount of work and time that people put into it. So thank you very much.
Ms. Rothaus?
High school, okay. So first of all, Jill DeLoe and our music department took 30 students to Nashville, Tennessee for a music trip, the Music City Tour. It was highly successful. We had some parents go on the trip. Everyone came back excited. Some other acknowledgements before I get into my report. Our students of the month were Jack Tremblay and Shelby Taco, so we're excited about that. The wrestling team and the Booster Club and Coach Gannon's, we held the wrestling tournament at Campbell High School on February 21st, so all Division III wrestling teams throughout the state came here. It was really important that the NHIA found the event to be very organized, because then we can keep it here. We don't take the door money, the NHIA does what we do. We get all the money for the concessions. The feedback that I got from the NHIA was we were perfect. I mean, they were so impressed, and I have to say there were so many community people here. when I came in on Saturday. It was just a great event. It was a really community event, so that was great.
I believe the money was to purchase new mat, maybe? Any of the money they raised?
Mhm.
Any idea how much they raised?
I don't know yet. They didn't tell me the money stuff
Okay.
yet, but I know that the food was outstanding. Like, I mean, people made homemade everything. It was great. So everybody was happy that day. And we were very successful in wrestling too. Jack could probably tell you how many state wrestlers we had. Jack wrestled very well that day. The first team, they did their shipment of the robot on time. Because of all the snow days, I'm gonna tell you, they were really in crunch time. And I really thought they were gonna sleep over here some nights. And a lot of really dedicated parents and students again. So, very impressive at how hard they worked. If you have a chance, if they're going to be in UNH on March 21st and 22nd. Last year they were very successful, and we think they're going to be as successful this year. And then just a quick shout out to Pat Jewett. On Sunday night was her dinner, and over 100 people came. She is a former school board member. She was, I think, the first select woman for the town of Litchfield. And there was just a lot of community spirit recognizing Pat, and she had a lot of funny stories to tell about her time on the school board and being a select woman. Our 8th grade parent night is on March 5th at 6:30, which is tomorrow night. And then I wanted just to spend a little bit of time. Bill Hicks and I continue our work on the Greater Nashua Public Health Committee. And what we do is we use assessment data to identify, analyze our community's assets, strengths, resources, and needs. And the complete report is online, but I just wanted to give you something that would be easier to read. There's a lot of good information in here. It shows that number one, that Litchfield is actually, you're a young town. You're a young town. It is the youngest town in the region. Your average age is 38.5, where New Hampshire is an aging state, being 41.1. Again, I just pulled some highlighted things. Our dropout rate, again, 2012 and 13, you can see that compared to other school districts in the area. Income. Suicide is, one of the top 10 leading causes of deaths for all ages in the United States. It is still the leading cause of death for 15 to 24-year-olds in the United States. And, we at Campbell High School, we do, suicide prevention and health classes, and, we have our chat team, and we do have some intervention practices. If you look on page, it just says page 2 through 18, Campbell High School, you can see the percentage of students who reported in the assessment that they, either thought about hurting themselves or actually had an attempt in the last 12 months. The next thing is physical activity, and you can see that percentage of kids attending physical education classes. In 9th grade, we have 70%, 10th grade 34, 11th grade 28.6, 12th grade 37.6. Again, looking at schools in the area, we are giving our students physical education on a daily basis, which is a really good thing. Page 8.1. What I really wanted to talk a little bit about tonight is that substance abuse, has both short-term and long-term health and safety consequences. And part of our work on this committee, we put priorities together. And at our last meeting, we ended up putting heroin as a priority. And it was always marijuana, alcohol, prescription drugs, and now it's heroin. And there's a lot of work to be done, but Project Safeguard that Tom does in the middle school, all those prevention education programs are so critical because having kids never choose to do drugs, in middle school and high school is going to be really the answer. And, the funding for education, substance abuse, and trying to get intervention and help is going down. So it's really important to have prevention education. Some of the prevention education that we actually do at our school is Life of an Athlete, which I know that Jack again could probably talk about. Life of an Athlete is a national program that we were able, I was actually, through the work that I do in this committee, was able to get that committee to work with the NHIA, and they adopted it. And through Life of an Athlete, they've just done a lot of surveys of schools that are invested, and they're finding that the student use rate is going down, more kids are completely abstaining. This past year, John Patterson was awarded $1,500 for his work being a model school for Life of an Athlete. John and I are going to be again presenting at the NHIA conference in March about our work. And part of that work goes back to the co-curricular policy. I know that Mary probably was on the board and John, but our co-curricular policy is actually being used statewide as a really excellent policy on getting kids to understand that there's consequences, but you have second chances. And so this policy is used at all of our meetings, and I know there was a lot of hard work put into it. So, sometimes I don't think people tell you enough, like that some of our work is really making a difference. So this is what I wanted to share. There is always room on this committee for school board members. There are some school board members from other towns on it, so if anyone's interested, Bill and I would love to have you. The next meeting is going to be next week at Merrimack High School. There's judges, there's a lot of prevention education people, and it's really important work. And like I said, I applaud Tom for his work in Project Safeguard, because I really think prevention education is the key.
Thank you. Any questions for?
One quick note, the high school counselors came down today, presentory graders, did a great job, felt like the feedback was real positive, felt like it was very informative, and the kids were really excited about the.
They always like coming to high school.
Yeah.
Until they have to come.
Until they have to do the work. They like the social part.
Any questions? No? I believe you wanted to skip while we still have her on the hot seat,
Yes,
just skip
if
the calendar.
We jumped up to old and or unfinished business for the school calendar and CHS graduation date.
Sure, yeah.
June 30th, huh?
This is number 1. So this is the current year, right?
Yep.
So do we need to figure, are we trying to find a graduation date? Is that the problem?
Right. And one thing that Dr. Cochran talked to me about, and I did talk to the senior classes, what if we had a Saturday where the seniors came in? We did do that one day, and they were open-minded to it, because then you could use the hours.
Okay.
So we just had a brief conversation. We'd say we'd have a deeper one after we knew which way you guys.
What the
were.
options were. How many days do they need to make up in order for it? They need to make up 5?
Well,
In order to hit the 12th graduation?
we would have to make up right now, assuming we get the waiver for the
The 1 day.
for the state of emergency. That would put the existing final day as the 24th, so we would have to make up 3 days.
Can they use, they have enough hours, but that's already included in their hours for the week before, right? That's the problem. They can only use 5 days worth of hours to,
The difference is, they can only have 5 days or 30 hours less of instruction
Than the rest
than
of
all of
school.
the other high school students.
so would we be looking at using 3 Saturdays then, or, I guess, what are our options?
June 19th. That's your option.
Yeah, 1 Saturday is one thing, 3 is not. That's a big deal.
3 Saturdays.
Well,
is
you
tough.
can't have 3 Saturdays because
Sports.
the teachers have to want to come in, and I don't think that's worth even trying to walk down that lane. We tried that lane and it didn't work. So why try it again? We put our cards on the table. That the reason we were trying to fix this was for graduation, and we met with them. That
Yeah.
didn't seem to pull any sway.
Yeah, I think
At
it's
that
really
date.
unfortunate for the seniors that that's, sorry guys, but I think that's where we're at, is there is no other option but keep going to school, because we didn't come to any kind of reasonable agreement, which is unfortunate.
I mean,
I don't think there's anything else you can do.
The only good thing is the last few Fridays on the second week in June have been rainy.
So you're holding out for the third one now?
So you're holding out.
We've been holding
There you
out
go.
for the weather. I mean, I hate to say it, but that's, you know, the last 2 graduations have been inside, and I really like the outside
That's nice.
graduations, but
Yeah.
it's
Really
too
nice.
bad because we have.
sure you're
hours
gonna have
to
your
make the
football field
repairs.
back by then?
Still might be
Coming in
inside for
snow.
different reasons.
Right, we still
have
have
snow in June.
flooding.
I mean, I don't see any other, I mean, any decision you make now means that you're not gonna have to cancel school. And that's just not, I just don't think, you know, while that, I would hope we don't have to, I think that's just an unfair realistic.
The main reason
Expectations.
for suggesting that we have this conversation this early in the school year really is that graduation is an important part of students' life and family life, and it's very important to give as much notice as we can, because often, you know, grandparents and relatives travel, and they want to be able to book early and get cheaper rates. and-
Technically speaking, you can have it Wednesday.
Right, which would be, that's very difficult.
That's
And
So-
some
so
schools
the
do
reality
say-
is-
Yeah,
It's really hard.
Yeah, that just makes it hard.
You know.
Some private schools do it during the week.
Yeah, but I mean, you know, the reason we always try to do it on the Friday was the family aspect of that, so.
So Lori, are you requesting that the board set a date?
We have,
For
look,
graduation?
as much as, you know, it breaks my heart just because I know it's, you know, kids have orientation, they have work, they have all those commitments, it's late to graduate. I don't think we have another option, you know, but I don't know how many waivers the state will give us, so.
Do you have a motion?
Do you need a motion?
I don't think you need a motion, I just think you need to set it for June
No, it's the
19th.
board calendar.
It's our calendar,
Calendar,
yeah.
oh, so I'll make a motion to approve the calendar.
Well, no,
19th.
approving it's the
Approve
14th,
it.
yeah. Right now it's on the 12th, so we need to make a motion. to
So
make
make
it
a motion to approve graduation for June 19th? So
Second.
make.
Second.
Any more discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstained? Motion carries 4-0.
So, do we need to make a motion to move your graduation in 8th grade too?
Mine's the night before the last day.
Doesn't really matter, whatever that is.
I haven't set that date. We gotta get through it.
Whatever.
Middle school is the ultimate in
Happy 4th of
fragmentation.
July.
He does 1 month at a time.
Sounds like
Worry about
we're
that
out of
in
school
June
tomorrow.
1st, right?
Knowing that graduation at the high school does help our other things though for us, like the school dance, the 8th grade dance. So, thank you.
It's too bad.
Let's do that in June.
Drew? Do you have anything else?
No, I
No?
haven't.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay. Dr. Young?
Thank you. Just one highlight on my actual report. I delineated here what the activities would be for the March 10th day. They'll be similar in each of the buildings. And part of that day includes a guest speaker who will speak to universal design for learning for all students, which fits with our youth design initiative. The assessment report is a separate document that I've given you, and what I've done here is to list all of the assessments that our students encounter. Many of them are at the district level within the school system, but you'll also see PSAT, which we give here, but it's a College Board assessment. and the SAT, which students take at other locations. The AP tests, which are given here within our selected, students actually select to take the tests or not. And the others, starting with the nurse's report and down to failure rates, are the kinds of internal data that we collect for a variety of purposes. So it's not that students will take any of those as assessments, obviously. They are record keeping in the district. And then the last one refers to, as Lori was speaking about, the NEASC initiative that occurs every 10 years, but there's very large data that's collected through that very soon. Into next year, the school will be releasing their self-study and collecting data from the community, and, students, staff, and the broader community. And lots of data is accumulated into that report that's presented to the Association for Schools and Colleges.
On the bottom of your assessment program, you talk about survey, alumni survey,
Yes.
and parent surveys.
Yes.
Is there a chance that the next time you're here or before, you could share with the board the questions that you're asking?
Those don't exist. I'm making
Oh.
recommendations that these are 3 types of surveys that we should seriously consider doing. They all would incur expense, which is probably one of the reasons that they've not been considered in the past. But EASC, for one, does recommend some kind of regular student and parent input, not just every 10 years.
And when it says parent survey every 2 years, is that parents of students in the district,
At that
or
time,
after
yes.
or they've graduated or something
Well,
like that?
it could be either.
Okay,
It could
so I mean,
be
it should
any
encompass all,
combination. Right, so, at least we should be surveying current students' parents about their satisfaction, their perceptions of the education that their children are getting at the current time. I mean, some districts do it every year, that becomes more expensive, but at least if you do it every 2 years, it means that you're gonna catch parents at each level.
When you say it's expensive, why do you think it's expensive?
Well, there are several ways to do this. The most efficient way, based on the limited capacity we have within the district, rather than do it yourself, you hire a company, and there are a lot of companies that do it. Actually, the School Boards Association has a mechanism to do it. There are other companies that you can pay that will actually refine the questions, bank of questions. You work with those and decide which are the most important questions. It's really important that you don't ask too many questions because people won't answer the survey, but you want to ask enough so that your data is valuable to you. And you also want to keep the questions fairly similar each time you give the survey so that you have longitudinal data. You might ask very few that are unique to that period of time, but most of them you would keep the same. And what they will do is not only provide question samples, prepare the surveys, you decide whether you want to do mailings or just electronic surveys, so we would use our
Strictly
alert now system
electronic,
and do
yeah.
it that way. And then what they really do that's of value is they collate the data for you. So if they do it in a form, maybe you've taken surveys online like SurveyMonkey, Google Docs, any of those, what they do is extract the data and they will disaggregate it in lots of different ways, by gender, by age of student, age of parent, any way that you determine. And there are different fee structures for all of those. I'm not taking the time yet to investigate those because I wasn't sure how serious we were in terms of doing this, and it also depends on a lot of it is a per student or per family cost, so we are smaller, so that will help in some regard. The first year is already more expensive because you're setting up your basic template.
I was gonna say, the timing is kind of fortuitous in that our 3-year strategic plan and goals expires at the end of June, as we mentioned earlier. At the same point in time, we're transitioning from 10 years of NECAP fall testing, which is unusual. One of the reasons that fall testing was put together was that testing companies have more capability and therefore could give the combined states a better price for grading constructed response items in the fall. Everybody else tested in the spring. So we're now flipping a lot of what we have to do. So we used to do NWA at the end of year, well, now Smarter Balances at the end of year. So as we're moving forward with the new strategic plan, this is a great time to look at what exactly are we measuring, what's its purpose. We were able to, based on savings that Dr. Hand was able to generate, although I seem to say that a fair number of times each year in different areas, we're able to pilot Ames Web, and feedback has been significant for use with a subset of the population, so that clearly will be in the mix. We know that we report regularly PSAT, SAT data, AP scores, those sorts of things. But as we work on the goals, there's some sort of meshing there between what measures and what goals. In some cases, most of the time you like the strategic goal and then the measurement. In some cases you have a convenient measure. Could you update the board on the potential for the use of SAT instead of Smarter Balance at the high school?
Yes, and do that right after I talk about the alumni survey?
Absolutely.
Okay, so that's okay. The other two items I have on here are equally important, and those are alumni surveys. We really want to get feedback from students who have graduated or left our school as to, the typical questions are, was your math preparation, your writing, did this help you be successful in college or the workplace or the military, those kinds of things. And by doing it 1 year out, they've got an immediate impression, reflection about that first year out of high school, and then 5 years out, the original rationale was a 4-year college and then the year after. So now you've been through your whole college experience, but even if a student is in the military or the workplace, it gives you that 4 extra years to say, okay, now I'm looking back again, and you actually not only have a different perspective from a more mature person, but you can compare your 1 year out and your 5 year out results. And this is very valuable in terms of telling us, is our curriculum constructed the way it needs to be? Is our instruction delivered the way that's going to benefit the students? And again, most of these costs, I don't want to estimate because the last time I did this was quite a while ago before I came here, but they could be in the order of each of these anywhere from $2,000 to $5,000. So, I mean, it's not huge money. It certainly is, a cost, but it's not huge money for the advantage that you get with that data collection.
I want to say I've seen, maybe it wasn't super organized or done at specific intervals, but I think I've seen data, some of this data, from like CHS and guidance reports. Is it from Naviance or?
Naviance
Okay.
does an exit survey in a
Okay.
yes.
But it's probably not, is
So,
it not
yes,
every
so-
student or?
Right, no, it's who actually sends back the information.
Okay.
So Jody could give you more information on who that actually is, but your kids.
And by
must have
hiring a
it.
company, you really get a
A higher-
percentage.
And you probably get more raw data, so you can start to analyze the data over time and stuff like that. But this is kind of probably, yours is probably more of a, you get a feeling, maybe.
Like if you
And comments, remember comments.
If
So-
they don't answer or you don't have the address, they will pursue that.
So that the board is in a position as it's moving forward with its strategic plan with the next board as we look to set new goals. I think it's very important that we have costs and we have an idea of what we're talking about. Because I can tell you 5 years ago, this was a priority one of the board with direction to staff to have this process completed. I believe it may be in that strategic plan, I'm not sure, but it was something we discussed when Dr. Cutler was here, and that was something that was stressed from the board as being very important to be getting this information back. And it was to be done more back then, it wasn't as, electronic was available, but it was not as easy as SurveyMonkey and some of the other processes that are there now, so, I don't know if we have to reinvent this wheel. I would imagine that this wheel is pretty well invented out there, of the questions and things. And so I think
You're
that.
talking about graduation surveys in particular, or just?
No,
in
no,
general?
we were supposed to be talking to parents and alumni. It's been something we've been stressing, it may have fallen through the cracks in the last 2 years, but.
I think actually, a lot, in terms of Naviance and the surveys and that results, I think we've at least twice in the last year reported back results about where the strengths and weaknesses that have been reported. And from a methodology perspective, if you can get the 30% return on a survey, that's pretty
And
credible.
that's fine.
We've reported out on pretty much all of this data. as
Well, we
it's-
haven't
But
talked
what
to
I hear
parents
you
and
saying-
alumni.
What you're saying is, well, what I'm saying is, if the board tells me that there's a strong interest to do this, I'll invest the time into bringing you some numbers and some options. Not a contract, obviously, but I will invest the time. I just,
And I think the board wants to see, at least I know I'm interested in it, so I'd love to see numbers
I
personally.
mean, I think the discussion had always been that we were getting readily information from present-day students. Parents tend to give us instant feedback on anything that may be negative, so no news sometimes is good news in that instance. But it was always about the students who had left the system and graduated. Where were they in a year? Where were they in 5 years? And also at the same time, what did the parents think at 1 year and 5 years also? It would be interesting to see that. So, I think that was more the direction of the boards, was we were concerned about what was occurring, of course, on a daily basis and yearly basis for the students that were in the system, but we also knew the pros and cons of the system answered that process, because if there were issues with a student, parents tended to get involved, you would hope, and that things could get, grades and whatever could get resolved. It was that after effect that we weren't getting that we didn't know anything, and we still don't know anything. And that's what we need to be able to
with
reach
your
out to.
permission, I would though, if I'm going to do this, also include the parents, formalized parent survey, because I think we need to know not just what isn't going well, but where we are doing a good
Well-
job, so that we can maintain those things if push comes to shove and we have to make some decisions. So we can frame that survey fairly specifically based on programs that we have. So, that way, those people we don't necessarily hear from, hopefully.
No, I agree. I think at times you may get a better feedback directly from the parents, because, they're the taxpayers and they're the ones footing a lot of the bills when the kids leave here and go on to college. So they're probably very much interested in providing us that information.
Okay, so
One of
we'll
the-
come back at some point with that information.
One of the things we may want to look at is your annual high school summary, which really is usually a two-page summary of graduation rate, dropout rate, all of the predictors, percentage of students who go on to colleges, and then list colleges and the number of students either accepted into or attending both. And that gets at one of the things that's really difficult to find. I mean, we've really seen over the last 4 to 5 years significant improvements in terms of academic results at the high school. And then one of the biggest questions for me becomes, okay, so is that changing our acceptance rates into more selective colleges and highly selective colleges? As those other indicators are rising, does this actually mean that students are, for example, getting more scholarships based on tuition as opposed to need, academic achievement, and are they getting into more highly selective colleges? So if you do that annual profile each year and then look over time, so even if you still have 82 to 85% of your students going to 2 or 4 year colleges in the military, but the profile of where they're getting into changes, then that's, you know, usually a really good indicator to go with those other things to show that in fact, things are heading in the right direction. And often, that gets back to something that I believe is really on the rise, and that's what's happening in terms of guidance. Because until you have to make a lot of decisions for your children in their freshman and sophomore year about course selection decisions before you really know what you're doing with your oldest child to get them into the sorts of institutions that you may aspire to. And I think Director Callanan has done a great job of enhancing that in the last couple of years. And she's also one who's been reporting those survey results. So to me, that is one of the longer-term indicators. And in fact, one of the things that I'll share with the board a little bit down the road is the 11 indicators with Project Red, some of which are technology-based, but some are not. And some of their indicators included things like how much opportunity are schools creating for dual enrollment opportunities? What's the percentage of students who are enrolled in AP classes? And so those sorts of things are where's your school community trending over time? And so that balances off, I think, a lot of individual high-stakes assessment, because it really talks about is this other growth translating into greater opportunity for kids at a time when that opportunity is probably more important to their success than it ever has been in history.
So April 8th is our first meeting in April. Is that enough time
No,
to get back costs?
But I can do it from
So
there. I
that
mean,
would
we're
be,
not gonna be able
that
to
would be May
implement this
13th?
year anyway, so. Logistically, for working with a company and all of that.
And I was just gonna say, you know, the Newsweek, you know, when the high school was chosen 142, one of their results was if our kids are graduating from college in 4 years. So they take their numbers and it goes in, that was one of the big indicators that Newsweek had never used before, but our kids are entering 4-year schools and then they're getting out in a 4-year time frame, which is really important because a lot of kids are on the 5-year plan or the 6-year plan. So they're doing what they're supposed to do.
Some of them do that in high school.
Just a quick follow-up, Dr. Hyun. If we did get prices in May, if we're just picking like a pre-packaged deal, I guess what takes so long? Is it, we'd want to go through the questions and kind of source our own questions?
Yeah, there really is no such thing as a prepackaged.
Okay, so it's not, they'd probably have some
Right.
recommended questions, but we'd want to create our own.
And if we're gonna roll this out, a year from now,
Mhm.
about this time of year for parents, and you would do over the summer for your alumni. That's typically back from college or May. So we have some months to work on the actual contents of those surveys. I just reasonably, in 4 days a week with Smarter Balanced and everything else, I can't promise I
Okay.
can bring that back in April.
So on May 13th, that can be part of the agenda. Even if you're not any further along, you can at least be part of the agenda for them to have a discussion on.
Did you want to talk to real quick?
Yeah,
SATs?
SAT option. So, one or two of the school districts here in New Hampshire over a year ago approached not only the New Hampshire Department of Ed, but the Federal Department of Ed, U.S. Department of Ed, with the possibility of using the SAT test in place of the 11th grade Smarter Balanced assessment. And in fact, they enhanced that offer, I'll call it, a proposal, by including the PSAT and also what SAT used to call Ready Step, which was for 8th or 9th grade. And they're reconfiguring that to be rolled out in 2016. And so it began to be talked about across the state. Were other schools interested in that? It appears, our commissioner has told us that feedback they've gotten from the U.S. Department of Ed is that this might be an all or nothing for New Hampshire. And so they pretty much took a straw poll of districts who might be interested in this initiative. And Dr. Cochran and I showed interest. There was no commitment there. But to let you know that there's a possibility that this will be included in the upcoming waiver. You probably know that the waiver to No Child Left Behind that we were under. The 2-year current waiver expires in June. And so they actually, by mid to late April, the New Hampshire Department of Ed has to submit their proposal to extend the waiver. And we're considering including this option for SAT rather than Smarter Balance for high school. And so we won't know what has come of that until they release the copy that they've sent to the feds in March. And then there will be some months of negotiating, probably back and forth. Last time it was over 6 months of back and forth with the U.S. Department of Ed to find out if that would be accepted. If it is, the plan that we were told about was that they would redirect funds that the state would spend on 11th grade Smarter Balance testing on 11th grade SAT testing. We're not sure if PSAT or Ready Step or its new version would be included in that package or not. So when we know anything, we'll pass that on. But the rationale behind it is that there's a lot of concern about students buying into testing in the high school. In New Hampshire, it's not high stakes. It doesn't count for, you don't have to pass to graduate. And yet, by taking the SAT, students will benefit because many students take it anyway to go to 4-year schools. Some take it because they haven't decided between 2 and 4-year schools. So the students are probably more inclined to take it more seriously and do better on the assessment.
The other key piece here is that the SAT is revising the SAT to align it with Common Core math and English and writing. And so it should be a valid measure. In fact, the new president of SAT was the person who led the writing of the Common Core state standards. So you now have an alignment of standards and an assessment. It would be cost neutral. It would take up less instructional time, and it would be high stakes for students because most of them are going to take it anyway.
I like it.
I do too.
It's a good idea.
I do.
It'd be
They don't,
far
they
more
don't care,
meaningful.
they don't care about kneecap or Smarter Balance.
The only negative, and it's a relatively small one, is that your historical analysis based on a subset of the population, when you go this rate, your numbers are going to go down. But basically because all of the students are going to be included, whereas before it was 80-some%. But if that's the only
Yeah.
negative,
That's okay.
Right.
But
It's a
everyone's,
reflection,
everyone's.
and
Right,
that
it's a
tells you
reflection,
something
it
that you
tells
can
you
work on as a
everything.
district. That's
Right.
nothing wrong with that.
Right.
Speaking of Smarter Balance and numbers and stuff, I've had a number of parents ask me, like legally, how required is taking the test? Is there an opt-out process?
It is
a re-
required.
Is required?
No Child Left Behind. Every state is required to have every student take the state assessment.
What if a parent refused? What would happen?
You have to tell them that they have to take
Okay.
it.
Someone asked me, so I was curious.
Yeah, I don't think it's any different. I mean, I don't know if we had parents who were not taking the knee or the kneecap test.
I'm sure there are, yeah.
It came up once.
Did it?
Very, very few.
Any more questions for Dr. Gale? Thanks. I'll bet you a buck I know who the person was. Sure.
that would be great.
Do you want to jump to that then instead of Knights of Columbus? Did you want to skip this and jump to one-to-one while Dr. Gale's still here?
Well, do we have any other district committee reports?
I don't think so. Here's the Knights of Columbus donation.
Okay, so let's jump and then go back to that, and then
We're done.
the documents related to the CHS one-to-one computing plan aren't meant to lay out any great framework. It's just to make you familiar with the process. We have a nice varied group of folks from the high school who have offered or been asked to participate and who have agreed. I was able to attend a wide range of PD sessions last week at the superintendent's conference, probably about 8 or 9, specifically about one-to-one in technology. So I provided a little bit of background. The first is just the committee members itself. Under the task, the first two are identify the student devices and the teacher devices. But that's actually the third step in the process. The feedback we were able to get at the conference was excellent. And it basically was the device is the last decision. The first decision is what do you want students to be doing on the technology, right? So what will teaching and learning look like? Then what are the specifications around the technology that you want in terms of computing power, battery life, screen size? So if you know what it is that the students will be doing, and it's going to vary from class to class, then that drives the specifications which drive. So a lot of people are making decisions up front about whether they need a touch screen or not, or do you need a stylus and and making some very big picture decisions without knowing what it is the kids are going to be doing on it. So tomorrow's meeting, actually, Mr. Perez is going to facilitate that first session, and the two big questions will be, what do we see students doing with their technology, right? And how will that drive what it is we're going to narrow our devices down to, so we could get a good idea. Also bring forth some models of how you make a transition from teaching without one-to-one computing to one-to-one computing. And then we have to do the same thing with teachers. So with teachers, how do you see yourself using this? What are your needs? So for example, if you spoke to Mr. Cooper and asked him what does he think of touchscreen and using a stylus for correcting papers, he would tell you that he's been doing, grading papers using commenting systems, track changes in Word for so long that it's not of interest to him. But if you're an English teacher who I love the peel of paper and want to be able to write across the papers as I receive it, then that would mean that you may want a very different device. Because for someone who hasn't been doing that over time, it becomes very prohibitive, and it can really impact the ability that you have to give feedback if you struggle with using track changes. Because often you want to highlight right here, do this, and it can be so much easier. So we'll have the same set of conversations about what sort of teacher technology, but I think we're going in with an open mind in terms of there may be multiple options here, because some things will be more important based on the subject and based on how they like to give feedback. So that's where we're headed with this. There are more ways to mess this up than there are to be successful at it. One of the sessions that I was at, it was actually a freebie breakfast at 7 in the morning on a Friday, was about Project RID. So you have a handout there. It was a 3-year longitudinal national study that identified the factors that related to a successful implementation. They also had success measures, by the way. I didn't include that in the package. But in order of predictive strength, the use of technology in integration classes, or in this case, for example, what we're using for our doubling up in math. So is technology involved in extending learning time for students and learning opportunities? Change management leadership by the principal and SAU office as well. Knowing that the process of implementing this is going to be a long-term and that needs to be managed. Online collaboration, it's used in the core subjects, which is where we're targeting. How to use online formative assessments, the student, the learning management system. It will be an excellent tool for this. Ratio, field trips, use of search engines, and so on. So if you look over the next page, it just looks at some of the data around that. And what they found was that of the study of 997 implementations, only 1% had most of those. And if you look at some of the reviews of people of what have happened in one-on-one initiatives, most people would argue that it's been spray and pray. Pass the technology out and hope somehow students learn more. And I think we're learning a lot from other places, I'm really glad that we're doing this as a pilot at this point in time. We're really fortunate to have a level of expertise in the district and in the high school that we do, and I'm really thrilled with the people who have stepped up with this. It's also going to change some roles. The library media specialist, I attended a complete hour session that looked at 4 or 5 school districts and how they've revised the job description of library media specialists to say, as teachers are making this transition, they need to find video, they need to find websites, they need somebody who knows that field. And that became an important part in these 4 or 5 districts of the library media specialist role. And, you know, that's a conversation that we have to have as well, because it's a significant change, and teachers need to invest a lot of time and do some things differently. They need the opportunity to experiment, but at the same point in time, we need to make it doable. And most people are indicating that once you start your full implementation, not a pilot, but a full implementation, a minimum of 3 years, really to get to the point where you're going to see the significant improvement that can occur if the use of technology is done thoughtfully, with good professional development, and pushes learning to higher levels. I think the high school has really done a nice job in the last couple of years at looking at escalating the level of deep thought, the level of writing, and then if you can transition that so students do more independent work and do some stuff on the flipped classroom where instead of, you know, lecturing in class and then kids go home to practice by themselves where they really have no feedback, watch a video lecture, you know, do the initial learning at home, and then do the more cognitive work where they can get more feedback and more scaffolding face-to-face in the classroom with the teachers. I know Mr. Cooper is one who's really hoping to work on that. And so what does that mean in terms of support and PD for teachers? So we're going in relatively slowly. Mr. Dewar and I will be...
Gotta have it by September, can't go too slow.
Mr. Dewar and I will be at the grade 8 parent session tomorrow night at the high school to talk about this as an option. The hope is that if students signed up, or parents signed them up, we would enroll either 2 sections of classes. So we'll have 6 sections of humanities, three humanity pairings next year, 6 classes at grade 9. And so either 2 classes or 4 of the 6 classes would be one-to-one. And we'll have to come up with a way to decide if we have more than 2 but not enough for 4, how do we decide who gets in? The other thing that I want to have some conversations with people about is having some community voice in this, because you're dealing with parents, and the more input you have from parents on how kids are using technology at home, how they see this, then number 1, they understand it better. 2, they're a little bit more forgiving when issues happen, and issues will happen. And 3, you get ideas from them up front about what they think the challenges are, because one of the main goals of this is to extend the learning day. And so their input is important. So whether it's doable in this round or for the bigger rollout after that, my hope is that we'd be able to get something, even if it's a focus group of freshman parents and perhaps some others, before we make any decisions about which platform. And then I think the biggest challenge after that is not a technical challenge, it's the funding challenge of how do we ensure that this applies to all kids and all kids can benefit. And that's a longer term conversation, but it's a really important one. We need to get that right. So, thank you.
Any questions?
Yeah, just on the, I talked to Dr. Cochran about this, but on the steering committee, I feel that Dr. Cochran should not be part of the committee. And I feel that because the committee, it's a task force. And normally when you have a task force, the top leader's not in the task force. He's tasked the staff to go and do this research, and at times there's going to be
Disagreement?
conflict or areas that there's gonna need to be an agreement or direction decision made. And I think the ultimate decision will end up in the board here. And before it gets here, we need to have, the superintendent needs to be an unfiltered process where he can listen to whatever the points are and then think about it and give direction back. And if he's sitting in all the meetings, inevitably he's going to be moved in a direction based on that discussion, because that's what's going to occur. And, you know, they may never need the superintendent, but my feeling on it is that normally when you're gonna have that, I think having Mike Perez, chair the meeting and leading it is a great idea. I think the superintendent starts with giving them the vision and the task that the board is discussing what we're looking for, and then have at it and give them their time frame of what they have to do, and with the expectations of you know, monitoring that time frame and that time process. I mean, you know, you said gotta move slow. You gotta have this move slow by June 30th. That's your date, because by that time, 3/4 of your committee is gonna be on vacation till August. So you're not gonna have a lot of meetings then. So you don't have a lot of time, and you know, you had to have a pretty aggressive timeline of you know, 2 weeks, I want you guys to be here, 4 weeks here, 60 days here, ready to, you know, give me a final presentation on this in the beginning of June, so you have time to go to the board. So we have time at the end of the year, if there's funds left, to encumber funds for you to have your program in September.
Some of this is platform agnostic, and some of it is not. We've had this conversation already, by the way. I didn't disagree with Mr. York. I did comment that, given that when we did the selection of Infinite Campus, that you had the superintendent, the high school principal, the high school assistant principal, the high school guidance counselor, all came from districts that use Follett Aspen, and we ended up with a unanimous recommendation for the other finalists. Gives some credibility to that people actually are, were told that it was an open process, and it was an open process, and we end up in this. I was the only non-voting member in the entire committee, and I did very little talking, actually.
And if I may, I would just, I actually support the fact that Dr. Cochran should be on the committee, and my rationale is that we have a limited number of people who have a high level of expertise in technology integration, because that's what we're talking about. We're not just talking about hardware, software. We have a few of our teachers who actually have that as a certification, and I think that to let a task, you know, having facilitated lots of task force and committees, you want as much information up front as possible. And if the task force were to come up with some decisions, and then the superintendent has vital information, you're actually going to lose time and waste time by not having that information up front. And recommendation can come through, you know, you can have dissenting opinion, and, you know, just like the Supreme Court has confirming opinions and dissenting opinions or whatever. But I think not, I mean, you just heard that he spent a good deal of the time in California researching this. It's certainly not anything that I've had time to do extensively myself. Mike Perez has begun to look into it, but again, that's not a major area of expertise for him.
But he has invested some time, and I think he's going to be very important.
And I'm not saying that that's not so, but I really would hesitate to say, let's not have the advantage of that information and the expertise that you've gained in that process.
So, this concern, not that you weren't there, I'm okay, I understand that. What, I'm concerned, because you're gonna talk to a group of students tomorrow and parents about having something in September that right now, you can't have that conversation. Sorry, I mean, if you go have a conversation and you get 60 students and parents to commit to this one-on-one steering, and we haven't picked the platform or device or anything like that, we're not ready for, I mean, I have to, I guess this is my own fault. I thought we were much further along than we are. Okay? I mean, that was just my thought on this process as we've been talking through this, that, you know, hey, all we were doing was figuring out the final device and things like that. Okay? I'm going to say that we need to slow your process down of breaking this out to the 8th graders.
Why can't you just get an indication from the parents? This is, we're looking to do this, it's gonna be a pilot, we're still developing the methodology which will inform the device selection. And
But
it's
they're
an
not
interest
doing
indicator.
device. They're doing a whole lot more. They're trying to figure out a software program to run the device and how the individual teachers are going to use that.
We know what the options are.
Yeah, it's like Google Apps or
I mean,
Office
so
365. It's really going to
if we have the new, if we have the new Infinite Campus Learning Management, Student Information System, we have their Learning Management System. We have two different platforms that are used in the high school right now. One is Schoology, they're used by 2 or 3 teachers, and one is Google Classroom. And so, in conversations that we've had moving forward, my comment was, after talking to the old IT director and the new IT director, the decision is, we can't support 3 platforms. We can support 2, but we can't support 3. So if we're in the new SIS, then the other platform will have to be either Schoology or Google, but not both, because we can't support 3, we just don't have the capacity. And I'm perfectly open to which other one. On the other hand, if we're not in the new SIS, and we're in Rediger with no learning management functionality, we'll continue to parallel, because we can continue to do that.
But I thought
So
we were
all
moving
the
in the
decisions
SIS.
all the decisions are choices within known areas at this point in time. And one
But
of the-
why would you, I thought we were already moving to the new information system. So
Well-
why, you're,
Not if Warrant Article 2 fails.
well, that's only, Warrant Article 2 is only we wouldn't bring on a person.
Right.
Who's gonna
It was
support it?
it was unanimous recommendation that if we didn't get the position, we can't do the system. And quite honestly, we would fail. It would be a mess. I mean, that was, we already presented this to the board and said, it was unanimous. Every single person in the room, except me, because I didn't get a vote, but I wouldn't disagree with them. And I met with the committee members afterwards, or I've spoken to several of them, and you know, they very much appreciated the notion that their perspective, unfiltered, was passed on to the board. If that position is not filled, we're not gonna move to Infinite Campus next year. We can't. We'll fail at it.
But will that will that impede, wouldn't that in-person also be supporting? I mean, inevitably, we're going to get to that information system sooner, hopefully, than later. Somehow, we'll have to do a better job at that if we're not successful next week. So, at the same time, then we need to make the decision, as other districts have made, to go to Google Docs or whatever the other one is.
Exactly. And both of those are working. Google's no cost. Schoology, by the way, in order to have a site license so that everything is linked together like a combined learning management system, for the individual class, a teacher can sign up and do it for free. To link it together so that it merges with your student information system is $10 a student, which is pretty much what will cost us for Infinite Campus, including everything else in the student information plus the learning management system. So, and in my conversations, I think people understand where we are. We have some good folks who have been able to do some things with technology. One of the major pieces to this really is a model of working with teachers over time and saying, so what is it you're trying to do with the technology? And how do you make those revisions? And we're gonna have to invest in some PD for people over the summer, both on the use of the technology, but also on how do you teach US history differently now that all these students have laptops? And you have to understand now why it's a 3-year process. And the difficulty becomes, what you just described, of just handing people technology and saying go, is actually the majority of the cases of implementation.
What other school systems around Europe are using one-to-one technology, and what devices do they have to use? We talked to any of them.
And I had, there were a lot of conversations. And every superintendent, and I probably listened to, either in presentations or sidebar conversations, award-winning implementations. And they all said the very last conversation is, what's the device? It is the least important decision, because it has to be driven by all of the other things. And before I came, actually, Dr. Heon, the summer that I came in 2012, there were a lot of technology-based workshops. So it's not like we're newer now in the skill set and the knowledge base. We have lots of people doing sporadically really good things. The question now becomes moving forward and doing it in a more systemic way, and doing it in a way that pushes forward all of those, advances that we're looking for in terms of the connectedness, the personalization, and especially the higher order thinking and the writing.
So, just to review my question, like, is Bedford doing this? Is Wyndham doing this?
Bedford we've done some more rule-outs than anything else. Actually, the last conversation I had with Director Dewar about this was today. And he has some strong recommendations about what not to use. He's been very critical of what he's seen of Chromebooks. One of the major issues with Chromebooks is when you're not connected, you have far less functionality. And there are some workarounds. But that's been, pretty much consensus of everything that I've read as well. So what is the price point? And then what are the ranges? The implementation in Baltimore County Public Schools. Superintendent, they've done a wonderful job. Their 4 or 5 year implementation, and they ended up going with an HP product that originally rolled out at about $1,100, that is now down to $550, which is a nice price range, a lot of functionality. But again, his comment was, we did a lot of things very well, and the last decision we made was the actual device. So Mr. Dewar has already had, I think, at least half a dozen different machines in. He's gone through his test of functionality to determine what the technical specifications that we're looking for. He's already ruled out several. Last year, we did some piloting on this. We bought some Surface Pros and a couple of other tablets. And so we have some experience in terms of what we're looking for. And now, we're really looking at, within a matter of a couple of weeks, getting it down in the ballpark of 3 to 4 devices for students.
I think we need to determine, we can say what they could use and how much it's going to cost.
Yep.
So I think before parents or students are going to sign on for this idea, we need to know what the impact is going to be. Really, and my biggest concern would be, is there going to be quality education coming from this program? So
Well, Pinkerton, to answer your question, Pinkerton has moved to one-to-one. So the question Janine asked was, what school districts surrounding Litchfield have moved to one-to-one in New Hampshire? And I know that Pinkerton has, because they went to Google Docs as their platform for their whatever devices and things that they're using in their school. That's the platform that they chose. I don't know what Wyndham's or
If you think it's
Bedford's
10%
platform
of
is.
existing, most people say that if you had a 10% success rate in what's been done nationally, that's probably high. Now look at the number of districts in New Hampshire who have implemented one-to-one and find 10% of that number, and you're talking about a pretty small number.
So do you know who the districts are that implemented one-to-one?
Wyndham has, but they did it a while ago when they basically bought laptops and handed them out. Around here, there's, I don't know of anyone other than Bedford who is looking at it right now. And what they did was they went through this process and they announced that this is a parent purchase. So they just went out and announced it, doing a letter home into January saying, here's a device we want your child to have. come to school. And the bigger decisions about, the biggest decision really is the level of connectivity, whether, and even with high connectivity, if you start to eliminate, is iPad an option, are Chromebooks an option, then you're down into a relatively small playing field, and you've already identified a cost basis somewhere in the range of $400 to $800. And then the other decisions are, so now who do we bundle from? I'm trying to think of the vendor, one of the vendors that we use now. We can work with them, according to Mr. Dewar, to get our volume rate, but have the mechanics set up so that the parents buy from the vendor at our price, and we still have the ability to get the consistency of the software on the device that will allow us to not have to worry nearly as much about the implementation. So Mr. Dewar has been very busy doing many things, and this is one of the things that's been very much on his radar in the last month.
It seems to me that if there are school systems near us that have been able to do this and have done it, they feel successfully. Instead of us trying to reinvent the wheel, it seems like we can at least leverage their experience and find out if they don't feel it was very successful, why.
Well, here's the thing, we are leveraging it because procedurally, but here's the other thing, nobody uses the same devices.
That may be, but
Yeah.
I'd be interested, hopefully, this discussion is probably already happening with everybody in the steering committee, but it seems to me if there are school systems out there who've actually accomplished this, it'd be interesting to hear from them. What are you using? Why did you choose it? How's it working for you? What's your infrastructure like? Just,
That's how I spent most of my last week,
okay.
with national best practice, some really fun. And there's lots of bad examples if you want to find those too. But we're just trying really hard not to become one.
I guess to John's original point, I think he was right. Normally it's probably best not to have the superintendent on a task force. In this case, it seems like, in case we forgot where we came from.
That's distracting now, thinking.
In this case, though, I think unfortunately, he's probably the subject matter expert. Which in the future, we might want to avoid happening. Maybe someone else should be the subject matter expert, but in this case, I think we're already there, and he's probably the guy that has to
I've
be
been
kind of.
teaching online and hybrid classes for
Yeah.
over 12 years,
Yeah.
and taught graduate courses in how to do this, and develop master's degrees in how to develop people who are
Well, I mean,
certified to do it.
the other
So-
thing that the board can take a look at, and I would agree that if we're looking at trying to get this up for, in the fall, for part of, I mean, the program that we approved in February, the spreadsheet that we reviewed and we looked at and we approved, showed us with all the students in the freshman year being a participant in the program. Now we're hearing
No,
maybe not.
the first year was always a pilot that would be a
Yeah,
subset.
but it was everybody. It was
No.
118 students. Well, that's your spreadsheet
Not the
shows.
first, not the pilot. I mean, we said, here's
Well,
the number of students.
When I looked at the number of students, it said,
It's like 108 or something.
or 100, whatever the number of students
Pull it up
was.
right now.
It seemed to be correlating
It'd
with
say
the number of
117.
students coming in with being part of the pilot program.
Yeah, that's the maximum number.
Okay, well, that's not how I read that, or I didn't ask the question, so, but it's looked to me when I read that, okay, this is how many students, so we're gonna have 108 students. So when you shared earlier that it would be half, 50% of them, or 60% of them, well, I said, well, okay. But at the same time, if we're just now putting together the task force to implement a one-to-one commuting program in which failure is achieved 90% of the time and success is
Less-
10%
less
of the
than
time,
optimal success.
we are really rolling the dice on trying to be success. I mean, I said, let's do a survey, and I'm told a survey needs to wait a year, and I would agree. So how can a one-to-one program in which we cannot today say this is how it's going to work, be up and running successfully by September 1st?
We know what all the parameters are, and we know what all the decisions are. It's just a matter of going through and doing them.
Well, okay, then I would say this committee needs to come back and give us an update at the first meeting in May.
We should make updates every meeting.
Well, we should be, well, I don't know if we need them every meeting, but we need an update in April. But by that first meeting in May, they need to come in with some, this is the program, this is what we're going to do, this, so that, you know, because the school board loves to wait till the last second, and then we get pounded because we make a decision that maybe we didn't have a chance to vet through. So I can tell you that if it's not here for me to look at before our meetings in June, I will not vote for it. So just so you understand that. And I will vigorously defend that point to all the other members of the school board, because we need time to look at it just like this, because I'm thinking you're vetting the whole freshman class a month later, only to hear that, well, no, that's going to be that would be the maximum if everything clicked well. But that's not what I thought was occurring. So this needs to be in our hands so that all the members, so we can spend 2 or 3 minutes, 2 or 3 meetings for 30 minutes, just kicking this around to make sure that we're all on the same page, that we understand the same thing is going to occur, so that when we're asked questions in the community over the summer or by parents who have 8th graders moving in, we can at least say with some knowledge that this is what we believe is going to be occurring, and this is why we believe that. So, you know, I'm hoping this task force can, you said they're gonna move slowly. I don't know what your definition of move slowly is, but
The last thing to be impacted is instructional change. Getting the technology in, and having people understand what they're trying, how you're gonna change your instructional practice, how are you gonna support that, how do you identify the PD? That's all scheduled to be done in the next month, which would put us in early April.
But these are devices that you would want to, if you're going to have them and you're going to put them in the, you know, if I was doing this, and this is, if I was in charge, and I'm not, but I would want this decision made so that when the teachers left at the end of the year, here is your device. We're going to hold training on these 3 days in July and August. It's an optional training. If nobody's there, that's fine. If 2 people are there, we're going to train and we're going to answer your questions. But this is what the expectations are, and for the teachers to go, hey, this is where you need to be able to upload your teaching plan, whatever you are going to want. You know, these are the devices that, as freshman educators, we're going to expect you to be able to use, and or if they need, if we need to compensate them to come in for training and stuff.
That'll be too. But the other thing is that I don't think we're or anybody is in a situation to say, here are the things you must do with your computer in order to do this. Teachers are professionals in charge of the classroom. We have people who are interested in piloting this. There's some people who really are not all that keen on this, and they're not involved in the
Well, I understand that, but if we're moving that way, and if this is the new process that we're expecting our teachers to teach with, and I do believe that is in our authority to do, then it may mean that we need to make sure that whatever process is there available for them to learn is there, and whatever financial consequences are with that are also known. Again, these are all the processes that either you have a successful rollout, or a medium rollout, or an LA district rollout, in which you spend $1 billion and 2 weeks later you took everything away and you're out $1 billion. That's not going to fly in Litchfield.
We don't have $1 billion.
No, we don't. You know, we don't even have $100,000. But I mean, that's sort of the process
That's also
here.
why it's a limited pilot. We're dealing not with rolling this out with 500 kids and 30-some teachers at a
No,
time.
but we're
dealing
picking the
with
freshman
half a dozen
class.
teachers. Yeah.
But also, if we have kids who are going to be selecting what their classes are going to be in high school, and I would think that it might impact what some kids' decisions might be if they knew which classes this was going to be used in, and maybe they might want to be in that class. How do they make that decision? How are we going to handle that?
There's
Classes
nothing,
it's
there's
gonna
nothing
be
to
in?
handle. Freshmen are pretty much put in all of the core academic classes. So they'll be in core humanities classes, and what I said to the board before is either 2 of those classes or 4 of the classes, right, out of the 6, would be involved. So we would, the most that we would be able to say to parents is your students would be in English, social studies, and science, in which this pilot will be involved. Can't guarantee math because there are too many potential math courses, even though we have 2 math teachers there. So you may or may not be able to use it in math, and it will not be implemented in any non-core subject areas, period. This is a pilot. This is all it is. If you want in, fine. If you don't, that's okay. There's no way you could roll this out in 1 year across all subject areas and all grade levels. We'd be lucky to be there.
Well,
in
I
3
understand
years.
all grade levels, and I don't think that anybody was under the idea that we were doing all grade levels, but I was pretty sure that we were looking for the freshman class, because, again, based on your spreadsheet, by the time they're seniors, everybody coming behind them, so whatever freshman teachers didn't use it in the year 15-16, they need to be on board for the 16-17 year, because the freshman class coming in that year is no longer a pilot. They're all in.
Yep. And it's
And the sophomore class
core
that
academic
just
classes are
became,
the priority.
I understand, but the sophomore class that went from freshman to sophomore, is an all in now.
No. They're the pilot all the way through.
So they're only gonna be piloting the 3 classes.
It
That
could,
you-
it will be broader after that. And I'm pretty sure that we've gone over this at least a couple of times.
I guess we're not gonna be able to make a decision tonight, so
Right.
I would think the task force goes forward. If, April comes along, May comes along, and we're not at a place where we think we're gonna be successful, then it doesn't start in September, it starts in the next September or something, I would think. But I think we at least let the process get started.
No, I agree with that.
So I think this is a great, and I wasn't here for the beginning of some of this, so this is a great example of where we're not all on the same page. Like, what did we agree to, what was the plan, and then revisit it, like you said, Derek. I don't know, because some of it I wasn't here for, but.
The
talking to
original
parents, and we're not all
presentations
sure
were in
what we're doing.
February, March of 14. And it was a bring your own device pilot, which would mean it was never indicated that all of the students would be bringing their own device. The only change that's been made in the last 3 or 4 months was that the overwhelming feedback on bring your own devices is that there's a lot more negatives with them than there is positives. And that because there's so many platforms to support and so many possibilities of failure. Somebody has the wrong version of Adobe Acrobat, somebody has, not only able to open that video file, but they're able to open this video file. Basically, virtually everyone has said bring your own device probably is a negative thing to do. It's better to do nothing than to do bring your own device. And that's really something that has become much louder over the last 6 to 8 months.
Okay, if there's no more comments on that, first, Dr. Heon, I think you're free to go, but thank you. Next on the list was a donation from the Knights of Columbus to the Litchfield School Board. I am with the Knights of Columbus Council 13026 Litchfield. Over the years, the Knights made donations to the special education program at UMass, and we would like to make another donation this year. The donation amount is $366.71. If approved by the Litchfield School Board, the check will be made out to the Litchfield School District with a note directing the donation to be used for the special education program at GMS. The donation is made possible through the generosity of the Litchfield town residents and parishioners of St. Francis of Assisi Church, when the Knights have Tootsie Roll drives at the Litchfield Recycling Facility and St. Francis Church. Sincerely, James Sayer.
Make a motion to approve the Knights of Columbus donation with great thanks and appreciation.
Any more conversation? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes 4-0-0. Any questions on the manifest?
Does it have enough signatures?
It does. I had one quick question. There was $19,000 for snow plowing. I'm assuming that's just our standard contract.
Yes.
I'm sorry?
There was for the manifest, there was $19,000 expense for snow plowing. I'm assuming that's just installment
It's
of.
just, yes,
Okay.
total.
Wasn't addition to the.
Oh, actually, I don't know if it was, but they did hire, Frank did say they did hire them
To get the
come in
stuff,
and
help get
do-
the stuff off the roof.
To do extra
But I don't
work,
think it
so.
was $19,000.
No, it wasn't, but I think that was
No.
the first payment
No.
of the contract.
No, the total amount to get, did you notice all the snow over here by the road? The total amount to take the snow load off the 3 roofs, it'll probably be over $20,000.
But that wasn't it. That check was.
That was just our standard contract.
Standard contract, I think.
Okay. That was my only question. Public input? Seeing none.
Very quiet.
Do we have to have a non-public session? No?
Make a motion to approve non-public minutes.
I'll second.
Any discussion? All's in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries 4-0. Motion adjourned by Mr. York.
That's it.
All's in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
8:57.
8:57. If you're watching, Brian.
Wow.
Outstanding.
Shot.
With the principals here. Normally the principals don't leave till 9.
And a huge policy discussion too, or, a new change policy.
You guys.
That's it. We're not anymore.
There you go.
You're done. Happy hour.